In Macedonia, Alexander grew up as a prince in a world that measured men by what people remembered after they died. He heard stories of heroes who seemed to defeat time itself, not by living longer, but by being talked about forever. Those tales carried a simple lesson. Power was not only about winning today, it was about becoming a name that survived tomorrow. For a young royal, that idea shaped everything. He learned that a king did not just rule a country, he competed with the past. Each famous warrior or legendary founder set a standard that could not be matched with quiet success. It required something public, something lasting. Glory had to leave traces that other people could point to long after the ruler was gone. So ambition became more than pride. It became a plan for survival in memory. If songs and stories could fade, then monuments and foundations could hold a name in place. The message he absorbed was hard and direct. Death came for everyone, even kings. But fame offered a loophole, and the best rulers learned to build it while they still breathed. In 336 BCE, Alexander became king, and the change was immediate. He did not act like someone who only inherited a throne. He acted like someone who inherited a stage. Macedonia already had power, but he treated power as a beginning, not a finish. What mattered now was scale. He wanted achievements that could not stay local because local glory faded fast. He took the crown with a clear idea of what it had to do for him. It had to carry his name outward, beyond familiar borders, into places that did not care who ruled in Macedonia. That required more than safety at home. It required actions that forced the wider world to notice. He aimed for victories that sounded inevitable and for a reputation that travelled ahead of him. So kingship became his personal mission, not just a job of management. Every decision pushed toward the same result, a story of Alexander that other people repeated. He needed people far away to speak his name as if it belonged in their future. That was the point. Security could be shared with other rulers. Glory on his terms had only one owner. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed from Europe into Asia and did not pause to test the waters. He struck fast, won early battles, and proved that his army could beat forces that looked larger and richer. Success changed the scale of the mission. Each victory no longer felt like a raid or a border dispute. It felt like a new world opening. And once land kept falling, a new question followed. How did a conqueror make conquest stick? Holding territory meant more than leaving soldiers behind. It meant leaving a message. Alexander realized that names could do that work, quietly and constantly. A renamed place told everyone who belonged at the top now, even after the army marched on. It also turned a temporary campaign into something that sounded permanent. Maps and reports would repeat the name. Local leaders would be forced to use it. The landscape itself started to speak his identity back to him. So early victories did not just bring plunder and prestige. They taught Alexander a tool for ownership. He could stamp himself onto the ground. A city with his name was more than flattery. It was a claim of destiny, as if the future had already accepted him. And it was practical, too, because a named settlement could anchor control, supply routes, and administration. From this point, conquest and self-branding moved together step by step deeper into Asia. In 331 BCE, Alexander reached Egypt, and he made a choice that went beyond winning battles. He founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast and gave it his own name, Alexandria. This was not a camp or a trophy. It was a planned settlement meant to pull people, goods, and authority into one place. A moving conqueror needed something that stayed put. A city could do that. Egypt already had ancient cities and deep traditions, but Alexandria served a different job. It linked the Nile's wealth to sea routes that reached far beyond Egypt. It created a base for administration, taxation, and military control without constant fighting, and it carried a message that required no translation. His rule was not temporary. His name belonged on the map as if it had always been there. This single foundation changed the logic of his campaign. Alexandria acted like a flagship, a model that proved what a named city could accomplish. It promised stability to merchants and settlers, and it promised obedience from anyone watching. If a city endured, the name endured with it. Alexander did not just move through Egypt, he planted an institution. From that point, Alexander started to sound less like a person and more like a permanent order. As Persian power broke apart, Alexander no longer fought one clear enemy king. He managed a moving takeover, and he needed the takeover to look permanent. So he repeated a simple move. He founded new cities and attached his own name to them, not once, but again and again. Each Alexandria turned a battlefield win into a statement of ownership. The message stayed after the army marched on. These foundations did not land randomly. They followed the practical lines that held an empire together. Major roads, river crossings, and supply routes. A city there controlled movement, taxes, and food. It also carried a label everyone could read. If merchants, officials, and soldiers travelled through, they travelled through Alexander's name. A chain of Alexandrias linked far places back to him, like stamps on a route map. That chain changed how people understood the new order. Local elites saw where power now flowed. New settlers arrived knowing which side had won. Administrators wrote the name into records, contracts, and commands. Every time someone said Alexandria, the empire sounded personal, centered on one man. It did not matter that Persian institutions still lingered in places. The branding moved faster than reform. The result felt inevitable: Alexander as the hub. Central Asia tested Alexander in a different way. Victories did not automatically mean control. The terrain stayed harsh, the distances stayed huge, and local resistance kept returning after the army marched on. So he changed the map again. He planted new cities where he needed soldiers to stay, not just pass through. These were garrison colonies, small, hard anchors meant to hold valleys, crossings, and supply routes. A garrison colony did two jobs at once. It housed troops and administrators, and it pulled trade and taxes into predictable channels. It also drained energy from revolt because it put an armed community right beside the problem. But Alexander added another layer. He kept giving these outposts his own name. That naming turned a military solution into a message. This land already belonged to him, and it belonged to him for good. In places that had no reason to accept a distant conqueror, the name itself became pressure. It told local leaders that the occupation was not temporary, and it told his own men that they were building something permanent. Every new Alexandria acted like a stamped seal on contested ground. It warned enemies, reassured allies, and tied scattered forts into one idea of empire. The march continued, but the name stayed behind. In India, the campaign reached a hard boundary. The distances stretched, the weather punished, and resistance stayed stubborn. Yet the naming did not slow. Alexander still founded settlements and tied them to his own name, even when the ground beneath him no longer felt like the center of anything. That choice mattered. It showed the habit had become policy. Wherever the army went, his identity went with it. These were not just markers on a route. Each foundation acted like a stamp that made a temporary occupation look permanent. Administrators could organize taxes and supplies under a familiar label. Soldiers could picture home inside a foreign landscape. Local leaders were pushed to deal with a single authority, represented by a single name. The brand simplified control. It also broadcast a message. This land belonged inside Alexander's story now. At the farthest edge of his reach, the effect turned sharper. The further the army moved from Macedonia, the more fragile unity became, and the more the name did the heavy lifting. An empire could not travel with one man forever, but a network of Alexandrias could pretend it did. The name linked distant outposts into one imagined whole. In India, the pattern proved its point. He ruled through repetition. Alexander died in 323 BCE, and his empire did not pass cleanly to a single heir. It fractured. The men who had marched beside him, his top generals, grabbed provinces, treasuries and armies, each claiming they defended his legacy. But they also fought each other for years. In that chaos, one thing stayed oddly stable. The map still carried his name, stamped across key points of power. These commanders could have erased those city names and replaced them with their own. Many rulers did exactly that in other times. Yet many Alexandrias remained Alexandrias. The reason was simple and cold. The name worked. It carried instant authority with soldiers, settlers, and local elites who had learned to connect that word with conquest and order. Keeping it helped a new ruler look legitimate without earning legitimacy first. So the wars after his death did not just decide who ruled. They tested what parts of his project survived without him. His generals split the empire, but they kept using his label like a seal. An Alexandria signaled continuity, a familiar system, a promise that the old winning side still ran the place. Alexander's body was gone. His name still bought loyalty. That was political capital, and it outlived the man. In the generations after the wars, the Alexandrias that survived did not stay as trophies. They adapted. Their locations mattered. Many sat on rivers, coasts and crossroads where caravans and ships already moved. Merchants followed the safest routes and money followed the merchants. Storehouses, markets, taxes and ports grew up around the name. What started as a personal stamp slowly became an engine of everyday trade. Under the Hellenistic kings, these cities also became tools of administration. A place with walls, a garrison, and Greek-style institutions helped rulers control huge territories with fewer soldiers. People arrived for work, for protection, and for opportunity. Some Alexandrias became meeting points where languages mixed and rules got standardized. The name on the gate kept doing its job, even without the man behind it. Then Roman power spread across the eastern Mediterranean, and the most successful Alexandrias got pulled into a larger system. Roman roads and sea lanes connected them to wider markets, and stability made long-distance business easier. In the biggest centers, scholars, doctors and teachers gathered where wealth could support them. The result felt almost ironic. Legacy building turned into durable cities that outlived empires by being useful. From a modern distance, the question sounded simple. Did Alexander name so many cities after himself because he could not stop looking at his own reflection? More than 20 places carried some form of Alexandria. To critics, that looked like vanity carved into geography. But other historians treated it as something colder. A repeated name could work like a seal, marking space as part of one story, one ruler, one order. The debate turned on motive, but the results mattered more than the motive ever did. If it was narcissism, it still produced a network people recognized and used. If it was strategy, it still depended on personal branding so loud it drowned out local names. Either way, each new Alexandria linked authority to a single identity. It made administration easier, loyalty clearer, and rebellion harder to imagine. The name became a tool. Then came the contrast that historians kept circling back to. The empire itself did not last. Borders shifted, rulers changed, and the political structure he built broke apart. Yet the name stayed. It survived on road signs, in ports, and in the way later powers kept using these cities without needing Alexander alive to enforce anything. The young king who chased fame ended up printed onto maps long after his control disappeared.